had a week in Broome, and yeah, it's great. Caught up a lot of friends. Had a great night last night on the beach at Gantian Point, and messaged all my mates. Yeah, come around, we'll have a barbecue. So we had pizza on the beach. Yeah, and then now heading off. So we just turned off, heading south, just past Samphire Roadhouse. We're coming down here on this track down to Marble Bar. So we're just heading down here to Marble Bar. So we're going to probably head down to Newman, I think, and see what happens after that. We was saying we're going to go across the Ambadell, but a few things have come up. So unfortunately we probably won't be able to do the Ambadell. Won't say why just yet, but you know, I'll be able to tell you why later. But yeah, something's come up that we probably can't do it, which is a shame and unfortunate, but they're just the way it is. But Mikey, mate, Mike Williams, my fellow travels, he's down prospecting around Lenora somewhere, so I think we'll go down and see him, say good day, and then maybe spend a day with him, and then just head west from there. Not sure exactly which way. Richard's heading down the Tanami to Alice. He's got some mates in Alice Springs he wants to catch up with, some old ringers and old drivers, and he reckons. And I've done the Tanami several times, and we got, you know, I haven't been down this way before, so I was sort of keen to you know, look at some new ground. So we're going down this way, and yeah, I thought I might as well tell a bit more of the meal packing story, you know, because it's, well, we're just in Broome where I had my first kitchen. I brought my first kitchen with me, you know, made it in Blaney when I got back from America, and I brought it to Broome, and then me and Brian, Brian helped me redesign it in the church grounds there in Broome, where I made the number 2 kitchen that's sitting in the Gloucester HQ store. So yeah, a bit of history there and the Broome connection. But back to America, so I was meal packing with Claude Miller, and what it was, he used to take, initially in the early parts of the season, he'd just take families into the mountains, into the high country, they'd call it, and just, you know, families, kids, people from Seattle mostly, and they'd drive over, and what we used to do, we used to meet them in town at the Winthrop Saloon or Three Finger Jacks. There's these old timber boardwalks, and yeah, it's pretty cool. We'd meet them all there for breakfast, and we'd have biscuits and gravy, which is sort of like, we'd call a scone, you know. We'd have a scone with jam and cream, and they'd have gravy on it for breakfast, you know. So it was pretty heavy breakfast, and a bit weird eating scones with gravy rather than jam and cream, but that was the sort of go-to, or pancakes. And yeah, it was awesome, you know. We'd meet the guests down there, and I was with Rob. Rob's the other one of the other guides we work with, and yeah, so we'd meet them all, have brekkie with them, and then we'd jump in the old trucks and drive out to pretty much the trailhead, or the trackhead they'd call it. Look at this here. Wow, that's pretty cool. So drive out to the trackhead, and you used to have these old stock trucks, pretty much, hold 6 or 8 horses each, and they were wild old things, you know. They had four gears with a splitter, and I used to drive them sometimes. And Claude Miller said to me, he said, son, don't try and steer these trucks, just herd them towards the middle of the road when they get to the edge, you know. So they'd wander all over the road like this, and he's just get them back to the middle when they get to the edge. Don't try and drive them, you know. That was the advice of driving those old trucks, you know, which is good advice too, you know. These little windy mountain roads. Anyway, we get to the trackhead, and then the thing was then is to get the guests on horses and with a packed lunch, and away they'd go with Marva, the cook. And yeah, Marva was a very capable mountain woman and a great rider, and you know, grew up in the bush, so she would sort of lead off, you know, up to between a dozen and 20 guests, you know, from kids to elderly, grandparents, families, and yeah, we just get them on the horses and off they'd go. And then all of their gear would be dumped in a big pile in the ground, you know, and their bags, fishing rods, cartons of beer, everything you'd take camping, you know. Anything they wanted pretty much to bring, they could bring. There was probably a bit of a limit, but you know, there was all sorts of things, tents and sleep bags, everything, you know. So this is a huge pile on the ground, and then we'd have enough mules in the trucks, and we'd line all the mules up on a high wire, they'd call them, which is just a rope tied behind between two trees, you know, about head high, and all the mules would be tied up to the high line. And then this is where the mule packing started. We'd have these canvas tarps, and they're called Mannies, M-A-N-N-I-E-S. They're just big white canvas tarps, and I think they're 9 foot square. And then what we do is we'd lay 2 tarps out on the ground, and we would go and grab 2 bits of camping gear, or you know, items of gear, whatever it was, and you'd want to basically grab 2 things that it looks like about equal size or about equal weight, you know, and you pick them up, hold them in your hands like this, and say, oh yeah, that's about right, or that's too heavy, grab something else. So the goal was to pretty much get a big pack about the size of a big backpack, you know, like fully loaded backpack, about that size, you know. The goal was to get 2 of those bundled up with all the gear, stacked on top of these 2 tarps. And once you had the size about right, you know, the bulk of the size, then you'd proceed to wrap it up, you know. And we'd wrap it up a little bit like you used to wrap presents up in the old days, brown paper, you know. You'd sort of fold one over and the other, and then 2 sides. You'd sort of wrap it up really nice, tuck the sides in. You know, there's a special technique wrapping it up, but pretty much wrapping it up like a parcel. And then you'd have these long ropes. I can't remember how long they were, but they were probably 20 foot long, and they had an ice splice in one end, you know, a loop, so an ice splice, and a back splice on the other end, which is just a you know, back splice so it doesn't fray. And then we'd yeah, you tuck one end into your belt of this 20 foot rope, and once you've got the pack all wrapped up, you grab the rope out. You know, it's got to be really tight. You can't let it you know, unravel at all. It's got to be super tight. And then yeah, you tuck the rope underneath it, so you get the rope around underneath and pull the loop up on top. And then the other end of the rope you'd put up, and you go through the loop, and then you'd pull that tight, but you'd never pull the whole rope through. You know, you sort of tend to want to, you know, pull the whole rope through. But the goal with mule packing was you never ever pull the end of the rope through, and the reason for that we'll get to. So yeah, we'd sort of pull about that far through in a loop, and then pull that down, and then there was pretty much a special way to tie that knot off and secure it so you can keep going. So it's basically a half hitch, and you know, you do a little loop through and a half hitch, and once you've done that half hitch off that loop, then you could go again, and we'd turn the pack around and do another one again, just like you're tying up a brown paper parcel with a string, you know, like, you know, I remember your grandma or your mum used to do, you know. And yeah, so we then turn it the other way, tie that up, put a loop through, pull it tight, half hitch, and once you've done that, you just tuck the end of the rope through, and you do that to both packs. And then you'd have to wait, you know, grab both of those packs in your hand, which are pretty heavy, you know. They'd be, I think, 30-40 kilos, you know, say average 30 kilos, I reckon. So fairly heavy and fairly big, and then you'd have to yeah, hold them and see where you got to with the weight. And And the thing by not pulling through is the secret to all this was when you wanted to undo that pack, you could just undo the half hitch and pull, undo a half hitch and pull, and the whole thing would come apart very quickly. And that was really important, which means you could get that pack untied very quick without any knots, you know. As soon as you put an end through, you've basically created yourself a knot. So, you know, for ease of use, when you get to where you're going, you can unpack that really quickly. It's important. The other reason was if there was a hang-up and, you know, you got caught up, you could get packs off and everything really quickly. So, you know, a lot of ropes, a lot of mules. It was really important not to have any knots, you know. So then, yeah, you're going to pick them up both hands and weigh them, and then you pick the out of all the mules, you might have 20 mules. Me and Rob would have, say, he'd have 12, I'd have 8, something like that. And the best mules were up the front. So the biggest, strongest, the best, quietest mules. So you'd load them first. So you'd bring a mule over and tie them on, you know, onto a tree, and then you'd lift those packs onto the back of the mule. You know, now maybe I was helping Rob, or he'd do one side, I'd do the other side. Once I knew what I was doing, I could do all this on my own, and he'd do his and I'd do mine. But initially we'd do them together, and so yeah, you'd just lift it up high up onto the pack of the mule, sort of like that. And then once that's on, there'd be another rope that's tied to the saddle, and you'd do a special mule packer's knot. So you'd sort of go around between the two loops on the saddle, around, again, pull it through, you come back to the middle, do a loop, half hitch, and then you go up, down, around the bottom of the pack to a ring on the bottom of the saddle, and back up again. So you've sort of got a loop around the top third of the pack, and then one loop around the bottom, and that's what used to hold it on. Again, back up the top, through a loop, pulled down, half hitch, and it was secured, you know. So again, the same system that you'd wrap it up, you'd tie that onto the mule. And again, if you needed to get that pack off real quick, undo the half hitch, and the whole thing would just pull apart real quick. I'll show you. I can still do it, so I'll show you how to do it when I get back. That'd be cool to do. Anyway, now the thing with the trick with that too is because you've already weighed it, so you know which pack was heavier than the other. And if a pack was heavier, you'd have to lift that higher in the saddle, and say the lighter one, you'd drop it a little bit. So if this pack's, you know, say you felt it was 50 pounds and this one was only 40 pounds or kilos, you'd lift that one a bit higher. Now you did that because the higher the pack was, you know, the weight was up higher. If the weight was down low, it would pull the saddle this way. And the important thing with a mule was to get those two packs balanced pretty much perfectly, you know. Because you couldn't balance the packs perfectly with weight, because the different things you're putting in there, you'd have to balance them by where you put them on the saddles. Again, heavier you go a bit higher, and lighter you go a bit lower. So you might have, yeah, and that would balance it out. And really important, if it wasn't balanced, say one was, you know, 5-10 pounds heavier than the other, what would happen with the rocking motion of the mule walking, you know, the heavier one would just keep pulling a little bit more each stride, and, you know, after half an hour the pack could actually just flip upside down. And if that happened, then you got a cantankerous cranky mule with a, you know, a saddle underneath his belly, and he would just go nuts basically. So yeah, it was really important to get the balance right. So that's the art in mule packing, which is not easy to achieve. It's just practice, really, is all you could say. It's just getting a feeling for it, and, you know, you think that's, well, one bit heavier, and how high to put it, and things like that. Sometimes we'd even, I remember Rob used to stop, and rather than untie and change the height or the position, he'd just pick up a rock and throw a rock in. You know, a rock around this size would sometimes just balance the pack, you know. And he'd be riding out when he first started, looking back, and he'd see one just, you know, just not quite balancing. So he'd stop and throw a rock on one side, and it was then balanced, you know. So really important to get them balanced. Anyway, we used to do this as quick as we could, you know. It was a race, really. One, trying to keep up with Rob, and which I could never do. You know, he was a champion and a master, and but I don't think he could ever keep up with Claude either, you know. And, anyway, so I'd wrap them and pack them as quick as I could, and load them all up, you know. As soon as they're all loaded, you know, we'd tie each mule to the saddle of the mule in front of it, and there'd be a loop of twine basically on the back of the saddle. We'd tie the lead rope, so that the mules had no bridle, it's just a halter only and a long rope, about an 8-foot rope, and we'd tie that again with a 1/2-inch loop onto the saddle in front of us that was on a loop of twine. So again, if it really pulled back, you could, you know, they would break, or you could cut it off easy. And yeah, so I remember the first trip I ever did, the first mule trip, Marva was gone with the guests, and I ended up I don't know how I ended up with this little Palomino filly that I'd had trouble with back in the mountains with Chris, you know, a week or two earlier. And perhaps the first trip I had this bloody little horse. Anyway, Rob had about 6 or 8 mules, and he sort of headed off, tied him on the back of his horse, and again the lead rope, yeah, it goes up over your leg, 1/2 inch around the saddle horn, and then the end tucked underneath your right leg, and off you'd go, you know. And as soon as you start walking, you'd, you know, you would just basically turn in your saddle and watching your mules the whole time, like for the first half an hour, just watching every pack and how it's rocking, whether you got to stop and adjust them, because yeah, you could not afford to have a pack that dislodged, went upside down, because again the mules would just go crazy. If they went crazy, they're going to pull back, and they'll turn around and run home, and that's what you call a wreck, you know. And we're talking really steep country as well. We're going up into the high country, thousands of feet up, and rocky cliffs and steep ledges, and it was crazy country. So, you know, it's heavily forested, and you know, just a skill that you had to acquire. But a lot of things to go wrong, especially mules, because they're renowned for being, you know, stubborn, cantankerous, you know, and a bit like me mate Brian, my old boss, you know, he was a bit like that. Anyway, good old Brian. So anyway, this first trip, Rob's off, and I'm off behind him, and then this filly again just could not handle the lead rope getting tucked underneath the tail. She'd swing her tail, and she was getting it tucked up underneath the bum, and just playing up something shocking. And she was trying to sort of trot. She wasn't a real quick walker, and Rob had a really nice horse that was a quick walk, you know, so he was taken off, and my filly was trying to trot to catch up, you know, but you couldn't get into a trot, because as soon as the horse trotted, the mules would trot, and once the mules trotted, you couldn't trot with a mule if it's a full pack, because then from, you know, a gate that's like this, then all of a sudden the packs are going like this, you know, and they just fall off, or they would dislodge really quick, so you couldn't trot at all. You have to keep to a walk. So my first pack trip, I had a lot of trouble. Anyway, yeah, one time there, they just my little filly, she got a horse, the tail over the rope, tucked in under her bum, and she sort of kicked at the mule behind, and then the mule reared back and stretched her right out, and then my horse reared up again, and I lost the lead rope, so the lead rope underneath my legs sort of come out, and mules pulled back, and you know, pulled back, and then my filly's gone forward a bit, so now I haven't got hold of the rope. So I made the classic mistake, or the, you know, the worst mistake ever. I let go of my horse, and I ran quickly back to try to grab the lead rope of the mule. As soon as I did that, the mule turned around and he took off. There was only 2 of them, and they took off. We're about an hour out from the track head, a few miles maybe, and his mules took off. I couldn't catch them, you know, they're gone. And then I turned around back to my horse, and she took off in the other direction to catch up with Rob. So then within 10 seconds, I'm left standing there on this track head, and my mules have gone that way, and my horse has gone that way, and I'm left standing there in my bloodstone boots. You know, I didn't know who to run for. Anyway, so I had to get my horse, so I started jogging after my horse. I was still pretty fit of those days, but my horse was gone, you know. And anyway, Rob wasn't too far ahead, and it wasn't long where he come trotting back towards me with a big grin on his face, and he said to me, "What are you up to, Ozzy?" I was like, "Oh, bloody hell, mate, the mules have taken off, you know. The horse kicked and the mules pulled back, lost the rope, and they're gone that way." And anyway, so I said, yeah, I grabbed the horse off him. So I'll be right, I'll go and get him. So turned around, jumped on and raced after these mules, like flat chat, you know, as if I was galloping after a bullock in the scrub, you know. And anyway, I caught up to them, and they were in a little trot, bags flopping around, and as soon as they saw me coming, they just bolted again, you know, took off in the wrong direction. And I'm like, geez, and you know, there was no room to sort of get around them, so all I could do was race after them a little bit. And oh man, I was just in such a, you know, I was in all sorts of state myself, because I could see these packs just jumping all over the place, about to fall off. And anyway, there's a bit of a gap where I could get around, and so I just, you know, give the horse a good old whip and gallop past them on the side of this track. Managed to grab the rope and pull them up, you know. And then Rob come up behind me, and big old monitor lizard. Yeah, Rob come up behind me, and he had a good old laugh. He thought it was a great joke. Anyway, we tied the mules up. There's a massive goanna on the track.
Is it gone?
It's gone. I'll go further. Anyway, we adjusted all the packs, and we had to take them off, retie them on, and off we went again. So that was my first pack. It was a bit of a disaster, but we sorted it out. And then yeah, we kept going, and we basically used to catch up to Marva and the guests about lunchtime, where they, you know, these guests, there's probably a good, you know, a dozen miles or so, you know, 20 k's to ride. So it could be a 6-hour ride for a guest from the city. Not used to riding, you get a really sore bum, you know. So Marva would stop, smoke on lunch, get off and have a little rest. So whereas we wouldn't stop, we you know, had our lunch in the saddle, and we couldn't stop because we had to get past the guests, catch up to them, get past them, and set up the camp when they got there, you know. So when they got to camp that afternoon, they're tired, and you know, everything's ready to go for them. So we wouldn't stop, just keep riding. And yeah, and then we'd how many minutes is that, Darren?
I start again.
Okay. Yeah, so then we get to the camp, and mostly, you know, it's a nice camp the first day, the first night, and I mean, these are beautiful camps. It's literally like a golf course, you know, up in the middle of nowhere, very isolated. Every now and then we'd see a couple of hikers, not very often, but a few times we'd see hikers, and sometimes we'd see, you know, a couple of people with their own mules, you know, and a pack horse, you know, doing their own little trip. But mostly we'd see nobody. And I think this time we went to a place called Hidden Lakes. You can look that up. It's in the Okanagan's, or sorry, the North Cascades, and where's up here? So it's called Hidden Lakes, and just these couple of big lakes together. You know, big pine. It's just pine tree forest, Douglas fir. Yeah, beautiful little campgrounds, and you know, fresh grass, and flat, and beautiful place. You know, like an idyllic place. And the water's sort of crystal blue. It's all snow runoff, you know, so it's crystal blue. It's very clear. You can see the trout swimming. Anyway, we get to the camp, and we'd like we used to have in the old days. Big canvas tents, sort of square with a 6-foot sidewall and a peak, you know, like, and you know, there's big poles. So we used to set 2 of those up. One was for the guests to sleep in, and the other one was for the kitchen, you know, for Marva. And so that was one of the mules, was the tents. And then another one of the mules, the second mule, generally had there was these big plywood boxes, you know, about a metre tall and 2 foot wide and 1.5 foot deep. So just a big ply box. I remember 2 of them were for they were lined in insulation, and they were, all the frozen meat would go in there. So they were like an esky basically, and a big timber esky, you know. So they were on the mules, and then also on the mules were two identical boxes that they used to use as a kitchen. So the front would come off one of the boxes, and look at this here. Yeah, little steps. Beautiful, eh? Yes, the front would come off one of the boxes, the lid would fold over, there's a gas stove there. Pretty sure there's a gas stove, and I didn't really think much about it at the time. But that was a mule packer's kitchen, and Marva, our cook, her husband, Jim Mountjoy, he sort of, I didn't realise either at the time that he made them, but he designed them and made them, you know. And that was a mule packer's kitchen, basically it was 2 boxes together. And so we'd set up the tents. There was these big long poles that they'd left in the grass from last time, you know, from last year. And we'd use that as a big centre pole and corner poles. So we didn't take poles with us because there was logs in the bush that they'd use, you know, just cut from a pine, you know, a small pine sapling. And so we'd quickly race around and set these 2 tents up, one for the guests, and then put all their gear in the tent. They'd just look after themselves then. They'd set up their sleeping bags and their air mattress, whatever. And then we'd set up the mule packer's kitchen, the boxes with all the food in it. And also on one of the mules was a wood stove. So it's like a homemade wood stove, sort of probably twice the size of a steel jerry can, with a chimney and a little front door. And that was the stove, the wood stove. And there was, you know, a little cutout in the roof of the tent. So we get all that set up, light the fire, and get it all ready for Marva when she rocked up. And as soon as the guests turned up, we'd race out, and we would, get them off their horses and tie the horses up, pull all the saddles off. So, you know, there could be 20 guests, pull all the saddles off, and we'd lay all the blankets out because they were all sweaty, you know, and hot and moist. And we'd and then we'd pull all the saddles off, put them in a big pile on the ground. And then from what I remember, we used to put all the saddle blankets over the top of the saddles, because the saddles were leather, of course, and they were full of horse sweat, full of salt, you know. And there was deer everywhere. And look at that. And the deer were starved of salt, you know. They would do anything to get salt, and they would travel hundreds of miles, you know, in the bush. You'd see the goats, you know, up on the hills, on the rocks to get salt, and there was salt licks around where they'd all go to. And you see it in Africa as well. The animals would travel hundreds of miles to get to these salt licks. Anyway, the salt was in the leather, so they would chew the side off the saddle in no time at night. So we used to put all the saddle blankets over the top and protect them from the deer. And and then we had to go and get firewood, you know. So it was flat out, you know. We'd take the big misery whip that we'd been using to clear the trail. Here comes the truck. What's that? And we'd go out and we'd find some dead uprights. I can't remember what they called. They had a name for them, snags or something. I think they called them. Like, it had to be dead. If it was fallen down, it'd be rotten, because the pine rots very quick. So we'd have to go and find a snag, and something that was upright, dead, and all the the branches sort of pretty much fallen off, and that's what we used to look for. And we'd cut it up into 6 foot lengths, right over our shoulder, bring it back to camp, and then we'd have to cut it up into 2 foot pieces. Once we did that, then we'd have to get the axe and split it. So it was a fair bit of work getting the firewood enough for a campfire, because all the guests would be sitting around a campfire every night, so you have to have plenty of wood for the campfire, plus plenty of wood from harbour. Then we'd have to go and collect water from the creek. We'd say creek, but it's a creek. And we'd take some metal buckets and go and get some fresh water for the cook from harbour. And then we'd have to, before we'd done all that, we had to let the horses go. So, like Richard was talking about, with the boundary riders and the horse tailers, in the droving days, we would let all the horses go, except our own 2 horses, So we'd all the saddles off, the bridles off, the halters off, and on a couple of the mules, the couple of the mares, the older mares of the horses, we'd put a bell. So it might be 2 or 3 bells or 3 or 4 bells, and sometimes we'd even take some nose bags, which is a bag with a bit of twine around the top. You pull a nose bag, with horses that know a nose bag, and you put some oats or some grain in there, and then put it over top of the head, and they just munch away. So we used to even take bags of grain, and generally we would feed them in the morning. Once we got them in, so the horses knew if they did come back to camp, they would get a little, bit of breakfast. And always horses love that bit of grain. So sometimes we give them a bit of a nose bag in the afternoon, or we just let them go. And we're around the wilderness now, so middle of nowhere, and you'd have to. What we do, we just sit down and watch. You're observing which way they went. In the afternoon, it's important to see which way they headed off, because the next morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, when it was still dark, we had to go and find these horses and the mules. So the horses and mules all together, we'd let them all go. All the mules we had, we were in our mule train. All the horses, take everything off them and let them all go in the wilderness, And they just sort of walk around, and they knew where to go. They'd know where there's a little meadow, where there's some grass. Because pretty much there's not a lot of grass underneath the thick pines, but there's little meadows everywhere, and so the horses and mules would all go to one of those. Sometimes they'd split up, but mostly stay together. And that was it for the night. Then we could. I used to have my little swag, carried that everywhere with me. So what I used to do is Rob and Margaret would sleep in the tent because there was bears around, but it was warm in there. But I used to like sleeping out with the night horses, and also I'd get all the big mule pads, the horse blankets from under the saddle, the big thick ones, and they were still warm, and I'd get a few of those, lay them out and throw my swag on top, and it was luxury. I used to love it, sleeping out there. And so we'd keep 2 horses, my horse and Rob's horse, and you have to keep them tied up all night, and they were your night horse, So because you kept them tied up all night, they couldn't feed, but they've been working all day. So the other thing we used to do, if we had time, if we got to camp in time, we'd done all our chores, we'd walk up to a little meadow where we knew there was long grass, or Rob knew where there was grass, and we just pull the saddle off, throw it on the ground, give the back a rub, and with a long halter, just hold onto the halter, onto the rope, and let them feed, So we had to basically give them every chance we got. If we were stopping anywhere for any reason, or any chance we got, we had to let our night horses feed, because it's really important that they, they're working all day and they're tied up at night, so they didn't have much chance to feed. So it's really important to try to get that fuel back into them, And we'd also give them a nose bag in the evening, give them a good feed with that. But again, I remember in the afternoon we'd sometimes have a chance when we'd ride off a little bit, a few hundred metres, find a nice patch of grass, and we'd take the saddle off, and we could then just lie back in the grass, beautiful fresh grass, the horses are feeding, you have the sun on you, and you just put your hat over your eyes, the sun will be used like a pillow, and we could just, me and Rob used to chat, you know, and it was it was great times, you know. And Rob loved poetry. All the Americans that we took, they all loved poetry, you know. Robert W. Service was the main one. He was had a lot of poetry about the Yukon, which is up in Canada, and so yeah, Rob used to recite poetry to me, and there was his favourite one was "The Men That Don't Fit In" by Robert W. Service, and I sort of memorised it in the end, because that was what you did, you know. You memorised poetry and you'd recite it to people, you know, and yeah, the men, you can look it up online, Robert W. Service, "The Men That Don't Fit In," and I used to feel that some of those lines were talking about me, you know, because I have to think of it, I could probably memorise some of it, but there was some of the, towards the end, it was like, you know, if he just, it was basically talking about a drifter, and he just couldn't do very good in life because he just kept up and going and taking off, you know, and he might go good, but he just went far, and you know, he just, yeah, again, he was a man that didn't fit in, you know, and he just kept sort of picking up his swag and taking off, and he never did well in life, and yeah, up until that point I sort of felt it was describing me in a little bit. Anyway, and then the other thing too is, for some reason I bought a book of poetry from Banjo Patterson at the airport, which is funny because I was never into poetry. Wow, look at this. Amazing. This is the back road from Sandfly Roadhouse down to Marble Bar. It's just stunning. Anyway, so I had this little book of Banjo Patterson, so I was, you know, the long days in the saddle, I'd pull it out of my saddlebag, and once the mules are riding well, you could just hold it, you know, and read these, you know, these poems and recite them and memorise them, you know. So I used to memorise a lot of Banjo Patterson's poems, Mavsnow River, of course, and As Long As Your Eyes Are Blue, and oh geez, all of these famous ones. I have to think of them now, and yeah, so I memorised them, and I'd recite to Rob, and he'd recite to me, and then around campfire at night we would also recite poetry. And you know, the Americans they just loved the Aussie accent, you know, as much as we love their accent. They just loved Aussies and the Aussie accent, and for these guests, you know, for me to be sitting around the fire, an Aussie with a swag and a Cooper hat, and reciting the Mavsnow River to them, they just thought it was brilliant, you know. They loved it, and couldn't get enough of it, which is pretty cool that I had that book and I could remember those poems. And yeah, so we do this, recite poetry to each other, and I used to make some belts for them as well, and little bracelets for the kids, and we had a good time, you know. And then once we set up camp, they might be there for 3-4 days. We're taking fishing, you know, which is pretty cool, just taking fishing. And you know, I could go a bit of hiking myself. Used to just take my boots off and run up to the top of the mountains, you know, right up high where you could look down, and it was a pretty amazing time, you know. And we'd go for day trips on the horses, and yeah, so then the next morning, you know, we'd be all on again. We'd have to 4 in the morning. We'd be off. So I might leave that for another story, and that's probably 20 minutes. We'll tell a bit more of that shortly. All right. Right, we're heading down to Marble Bar, and yeah, I found the poem by Robert W. Service, so I'll quickly recite it for you. Yeah, Robert W. Service, The Men That Don't Fit In. There's a race of men that don't fit in, a race that can't stay still. So they break the hearts of kith and kin, and they roam the world at will. The rains are filled and they rove the flood, and they climb the mountain's crest. Theirs is the curse of the gypsy blood, and they don't know how to rest. If they just went straight, they might go far, for they are brave and strong and true. They're always tired of the things that are, and they want the strange and new. They say, could I find my proper groove? What a deep mark I would make. So they chop and change, and each fresh move is only a fresh mistake. And each forgets as he strips and runs with a brilliant, fitful pace. It's the steady, quiet, plodding ones who win in the lifelong race. And each forgets as his youth has fled, forgets that his prime is past, till he stands one day with a hope that's dead, in the glare of the truth at last. He has failed, he has missed his chance. He has done things just by half. Life's been a jolly good joke on him, and now is the time to laugh. Ha, here's one of the legions lost. He was never meant to win. He's a rolling stone, and it's bred in the bone. He's a man who won't fit in. Yeah, so probably a few similarities between me at the time, I reckon. And but yeah, we used to lie in these meadows next to Rob, and with our head back in the saddle, hold onto the lead rope with the horses munching away nearby, and Rob would recite that poem to me, you know. So that was pretty cool. Good days, you know. And yeah, beautiful little drive down here. Back road to Marble Bar from Sandfire. And yeah. Anyway, might as well finish out in 10 minutes. So we'd have the night horse tied up. We'd watch where the horses and the mules went the night before, and I'd be sleeping next to, you know, my night horse pretty much. And anyway, 4 o'clock, Rob would be up, and he'd give me a little kick in the swag, and we'd be up, and then throw a saddle on, and we'd be off. It was always pretty cold, so put a big coat on, and we'd be off. And generally it was dark basically, but we knew which way the horses were going, so we would head off, and you know, in the morning it'd slowly come, and we'd be able to you know, see some tracks in the grass. We basically had to track the horses, but there's, you know 20 horses or so they leave a few marks, you know. We'd see where the horses would be nibbling the grass, you know. We'd see where there's horse shit in the grass. We'd see tracks and trampled grass, where they've, you know, walked through a creek in the mud, and also you're listening for that bell, you know, like Richard was talking about. You're listening for that bell. Sometimes you can just hear them. A lot of the time your horse would, because you know your horse is pretty smart and they know what's going on, so you'd be watching their ears, you know, and their ears would be just back and forth like a little radar, you know, this way and that way. And if the horse heard they could hear the bell before we could, you know. If there was just one little tinkle of a bell, because by this time, you know, it's dawn and the horses are they're just standing trying to get warm, all huddled together under a tree or somewhere. You know, they're not out in the meadow feeding, you know, they're huddled together trying to get warm and pretty much staying still, you know. Whereas if they're out feeding, you know, the bell's swinging, you can hear them pretty well. But, you know, 4:30 in the morning, they generally wander a couple of miles, you know, a mile or two. So it'd take us half an hour to get to them, and then you just, watching your horse's ears. And, you know, they're moving around, one this way, one that way, trying to pick up a sound, and all of a sudden they just lock on, you know. And, you know, if you've seen a horse, or if you're riding a horse and its ears just focus on something, you know, it's a very clear sign. Anyway, and then we just give the horse its head a little bit, and they would most of the time, you know, stride over to exactly where the horses were, you know, and finally you'd see them, or you'd hear them yourself, and they'd be all gathered together under a tree. And then once you got up to them, you know, it was like a bit of a game for the horses then, because they would, you know, they're fresh and frisky and been out all night, so they would, you know, generally horses always want to run home, you know, and they know they're going to get a feed, so we'd be what we want to do is just walk them home, you know, but most of the time they would take off, you know. So what we'd try to do is get one of us in front of them and one behind, and, you know, just sort of you know, drive them in, really. But sometimes, you know, they're a few miles away, and sometimes they wouldn't go the right direction. They'd start running off. They could run off the wrong way, and you'd basically have to remember. One time it's this huge meadow, you know, you could see for miles. You could see Mount Rainier off in the distance towards Seattle, and enormous meadows, you know, you'd see for miles, and almost like the steppes of Mongolia, you know, like you see, it's a bit like that. And anyway, this mob of horses just took off on us the wrong way, and me and Rob were just galloping after them, and it was just like, felt like the man for Snow River, you know. We just had to get around them and turn them, and then, you know, it was pretty full-on action, you know. It was only just getting daylight, and you're galloping along on your horse, and the breath, you know, the mist is just pouring out of your horse's nostrils, and you're galloping flat on this horse, trying to, you know, watch where you're going, and trying to predict, you know, if there's creeks or holes coming up, and, you know, because your horse has got to jump over them or whatever, and trying to, you know, ride him, and also watch where you're going and watch what Rob's doing. And it's an adrenaline rush, you know, something you know, nothing like it. Anyway, and then we get them back, and we basically gallop them into camp, and often the guests would be up and filming you or photographing you, you know. I don't think there was digital cameras back then, but they take a lot of photos. You come racing back into camp, and, you know, then at the race would be on to, you know, quickly tie up our horse always first. It's so important for your own horse not to let it go, you know, and then race around and grab these, where you'd have a bunch of halters, all the halters over your shoulder, you know, maybe 10 each or something, and we'd have to, you know, basically get up to the mules or horses and throw the lead rope around the neck. Then you got them, and then whack the halter on, bring them over the high line, whack a nose bag on them, and then they're right, you know. And then, you know, just keep doing that until you caught them all. But, you know, it's not easy walking up to a horse or a mule and getting a lead rope around it, because they, you know, sometimes they don't want to be caught, and they'll pull back, and, you know, you've only got a couple of goes at them, and then they could be off again, you know. But most of the time we could catch them pretty quick. You know, Claude's mules and his horses were always really well trained, you know, like beautiful animals, powerful and strong, and well bred, very well bred. And yeah, so although we sometimes always at the back of the string were the worst mules, you know, maybe a young mule you're breaking in, or, you know, a young mule you're starting to work. You'd always put the worst mule at the back, because if he was mucking up, he's only got himself to muck up, you know, nobody else. And yeah, so they'd always be at the back. You'd have one or two at the back that are, you know, smaller and learning or been broken in, you know. So down here to the right, coming up behind, it's like a caravan or something. Yeah, so that's what we used to do. I remember when I first started working for Claude too, when he took me in the hills that first time, yeah, he said to me, I've only got 2 rules, son. He said, you've always got to carry a knife. And for me that was fine, because I always carried a knife, you know, a little soldier pocket knife, always carried one. And I can't remember what the other rule was, but I remember him saying there's 2 rules, and I only remember one. But see if this caravan will let me around him. Anyway, so here we go. Yeah, because the thing was with the mules, the reason you needed a knife, always had to have a knife, because he told me one story where, you know, you got a dozen mules and just say, you know, on a track, one of the mules slips off the cliff, which happens, you know. A mule might rear up or a pack might slip and something happen, you know. And they can slip off the track. Now, they're all tied together, so, or even sometimes if they get scared, they'll just all pull out, all stretch out, you know, and they pull so hard. These are strong animals. And, you know, they all pull out so tight, they can basically stretch their neck out, they're tied to the saddle in front, and the back of their saddle's tied behind them, so they can all stretch out, and they all pull, you know. And just that halter on them can basically choke them eventually, you know. So, and you cannot untie them. Once they're stretched out like that, you cannot untie them, you know. So, sometimes you'll be walking around, the last mule might, or what happens also, if you've got some horses, sometimes we take a spare horse, you know, in case one of the horses went lame, you know, and if the guests are riding a horse went lame, or, you know, they can't walk, we'd often take a spare horse, or sometimes two. And the horses, you know, they don't pack as well as a mule, so if you're winding your way around trees on the trail, mules will always follow the mule in front, you know. If you did a big figure 8, you know, on open ground, the mules will keep that same track, you know, where a horse gets a bit lazy and he'll sort of cut the corner. So sometimes what happens is a horse on the back, if you have a horse on the back, he'll go the wrong way around a tree, and then he gets stuck, you know. Then all the mules pull out tight, and you can't untie them, you know. So you have to have a rope, so you come along and you just cut those bits of twine real quick. You just cut them, you know, if they haven't broken, you just cut them, and you can save your animals. One time Claude was telling me he had a guy working for him, and he didn't have his rope, he didn't have his knife, and the mules all got strung out, and he watched them all die. He lost a whole string of mules. They all died because he just could not cut those ropes, didn't have a knife, you know. So, yeah, the other thing I remember, all of Claude's pickups and his little trucks, they always used to leave the key either in the ignition or under the, you know, the visor. Always the key. They'd be never locked up, you know, and that's because if there was it was in the mountains, you know, and they're always good people, and if there was somebody who had a problem in the mountains, you know, someone come off, broke a leg, or, you know, which happened, into the right here, you know, they had to be able to, you know, there might have been somebody else in the mountains, you know, another mule packing outfit, who knows, and if they had a problem, they needed to be able to come back to a trackhead, get in the first pickup, and drive back to the hospital or something, you know. So they always used to leave the keys in the trucks and in the pickups, you know. And where are we going now? Alright, we'll leave it there for a sec until I have a bit more of a look at the map. Alright, look at that.
Looking good.
Put up here somewhere between Marble Bar and Newman. Nice little quiet spot. And there's a leftover pizza from last night, so that was real handy. Looks pretty nice. We just threw the pizza oven straight on top of the fire pit. Straight on top. Cooked for in 2 minutes. Now we're going to sit down and have pizza and a beer. Quiet little night here in the bush. Darren's downloading a bit of footage. See these orange lights. Right, see the bugs, few bugs, not many. But if we put it on white light, so that's both. Give that a sec and you see the difference there. We've got this GoPro. definitely take some good footage. It's got this new speaker on it, which is helping. But yeah, it's a real pain to get that out of there. You've got to take the handle off and take this out, and it's, I don't know, it's a bit stupid. But it does take some good footage, and yeah, this accessory here, look at that. Got a mic on it. So, trying to up our game. Oh, crabs. Let's have a look. Yeah. Takes a little while, but there'll be lots more bugs there. But yeah, so this sort of time, there were so many bugs, moths and everything, so turn that off, orange, and then all those moths will be gone, you know, only just those little tiny ones. But it's the moths the main thing that won't come around. Look at that. Dougie's happy. Right, pizza for dinner, left over from last night. And yeah, very quiet here. Not much out there at all. Stealth camping. Got the lights down low. Yeah, it'll be right. Righto, so yeah, the little fidget's been great. But what's happened is it's all iced up in here, and we've just, so what's happened, yeah, there's a thermostat up inside there, and after a month on the road this was totally iced up and pretty much stopped working, you know. So it was old mate on the canning, was it Adam? Who told us about that. I didn't realise, but yeah, thermostat's up there. So what we've been able to do is just, we've blown it all out with this. We've just sat this on the drawer. It's another top little way you can use your blower, and it defrosted that in about 15-20 minutes. And I just had a bit of double velcro around there, sat it there. So yeah, it was about an inch thick of ice, so that was really handy. And but look how good these bags work, you know. We've been able to just pull everything out, and just wipe that down. Tricky to get in this one. I don't know, with these bags, where'd that one go?
The top.
As if you had to pull all of this out separately to try to clean that fridge. That one's out on top there. Down the bottom. Now, being in the bags with, you know, with the mesh and the plastic tops, we haven't had any problems of, you know, food not being cold enough. You haven't noticed it, have you? Yeah, so it's been no problems with the temperature getting through there, and yeah, right, that's the fridge cleaned out. Right, well, a flat tyre. I was just driving here and it just felt like it had a bit of loose gravel, you know, and I've known from last time on the gun barrel, that's a sure sign, you know. when it just. So luckily, I've been able to pull up quick enough, and it's just a rock. Straight in there. See how quick I can get this patched. Buy some more of these. Get a bit of air into it. See if that's going to hold. Alright, it's just got time to get the water in the brush, and look at that. So still a little bit of a leak there. There's a bit of a slit, you know, a good cut, so I'll whack another one. Just a fairly big cut, really. Alright, fixed. We were running about 30. Let's go back up to 35, just some big rocks here. Alright. Oh, must be roadworks. Yeah, so we just come through Newman, had a bit of lunch there, and there's a beautiful cafe there. Nearly this whole trip, ever since we left, well, what was major town? I don't know, Tamworth or something. Nearly the whole trip. It's been hard to get a good hamburger, hasn't it? Anyway, went into Newman, it's a beautiful cafe, and we got a big hamburger and a milkshake. So that was pretty good. So we're heading down to, we just left Coomarina Roadhouse, and going down here, and we're going to take the Ned's Creek Road, and that's going to go back into Willoona. So pretty much, yeah, done lapping back through Willoona, really. Not intending to go through Willoona, but that's just sort of the way it's going. And then we'll sort of go south from there to Leonora. Yeah, so I was just looking again on the battery. You'll see what I put up when I was camping. There was just not enough charge going in, and you know, the more we're using, what's been happening these last couple of days, I've got Starlink running all the time. Because just driving, you know, we're driving south, so it's ideal, and just leave it running, and you know, it's been good. And listen to some music on Spotify. I haven't downloaded all my songs, so anyway, Starlink's running, but that's chewing, you know, more power all the time. So we're definitely noticing, you know, the power that Starlink's using, even though it's only 3.5 amps, it's constant, you know. And if you looked at 3.5 amps times 24 hours, you know, there's 70 amp hours on its own. So anyway, so I thought I'd ring up old mate Andrew from Enerdrive, and I know Andrew is a really good fella, and I was going to ask him, can we get a 40 or a 50 amp charger? Anyway, Andrew didn't pick up, but he was away, but another guy picked up, and he answered the phone, and he said, well, you probably got a 40 or 50 already. I said, well, it's only putting out 30s. Yeah, well, that's in the settings. So, yeah, so he told me to have a look at a video, and shows you how to change the settings. So I did that. I crawled in underneath, a bit hard to get to, but I got in underneath, and sure enough, Kaido had put it all in, but it was only on the factory setting of 30 amps charge. And normally before that was that was always fine, before just running one fridge and that's it. But once I got this second fridge and the Starlink running, yeah, it's not enough. So I put it on to 50 amps, say on the setting, but it's only putting out 40. So it's a DC 40 what I've got. Now you can get a 50 apparently, so when I go back I'll swap it out for a 50. And a 50 amp charger you could be on 0 like we were the other day in Cape Leveque, and in 4 hours you could be fully charged if nothing's running. So say 5 hours because of what's going on, but stuff running. So anyway, we're now running pumping 40 amps in, using about 10, and so 30's going in. So that's this whole trip I've been putting around 20 in. Now suddenly we're putting 30. So that was a bit of a shame I didn't realise before, but it wasn't an issue really until recently when we were camping Cape Leveque, and now that I've got everything running, Starlink full time, I'm noticing it. So I suppose the lesson there is, I've got other people. I'm just flat out, I haven't got any time, but I've got other people to install it, and it's always handy to know yourself, I think this guy was ready to go around him. Not sure if we can. Road train. Yeah, anyway, so that's made a big difference. Yeah, which is great. The other thing too, I had a problem with Drive 240 volt inverter, because the power that's running all my other power points, which was for charging the chainsaw battery and the Makita battery, and also for the coffee machine, it stopped working after the second day, like 3 weeks ago. I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't get onto Kaido. Turns out I got onto him, and it was just one plug on the side that I had to push in and come out, and then all those were working. So again, if I had just known that, it's really important if you can. I mean, most people get other professionals to install stuff for you, but if I've had my Sparky put stuff in, I always try to ask him to explain it to me. So if something doesn't go right, if this fridge stops working or that stops working, where do I look? So it's really important to try and get that explained, and even if you've got to write it down, it's a good idea, or record it or something. If stuff's Kaido's put in, I can just ring him and ask him, which I've been doing, but you've got to be able to get onto him too, So anyway, yeah, pumping out 40 amps now, so I'm a lot happier about that, but I will get a 20 amp MPPT charge when I get home, put it in separate, and then while I'm driving, that'll be an extra 15 amps from 300 watt panels on top, and I'm going to get that 50 DC, so that'll be 65 charging, and then I could probably cope with the 200 amp hour battery then. That 200 is probably fine, because I can replenish really quickly with your solar. You can see what's happening with your system. The more you use, you've got your usage, your capacity, and your replenish. So what you're going to be using: 2 fridges, Starlink, coffee machine. Okay, so that's coming down. I've got enough for the night. That's enough for the day. That's fine, or enough for a night. Only just, but I got enough. But then if you can replenish all that quickly, well then the battery's fine. I don't need more capacity, because if I'm putting in 65 amps an hour while I'm driving in the sun, 3 hours, 4 hours, that'll get me fully charged by lunchtime. If I'm down at 20% keeping in one spot with a 200 watt solar panel blanket, then that'll be putting in another 15 amps, and that'll hold my battery. It'll be putting in a bit more than I'm using, so that'll be fine also. Otherwise, if I need more capacity, I'd have to get, you know, an extra 100 amp hours or a twin 200, but sort of don't really have the space, or, you know, don't want to give up the space for that. So I think with that solar controller separate and a 50 amp DC-DC, I'll have a sweet system, you know. And if I'm camping, yeah, I'll just combine that with a portable solar. We got solar panels coming, blankets, and standalone flexible panels and that, so that'll be real handy as well. Yeah, anyway, so we're going to get down to Ned's Road, wherever that is, and we're going to end up actually not far from Punya Station somewhere tonight, so we might even drop back in and stay with Pete or camp in the bush somewhere. Yeah, alright, no worries. But yeah, we're back on a bit of a main road. Trucks, road trains everywhere here, so you're good to get off this road soon and get back onto something a bit quieter. Alright, no worries. Right, pulled up about 5 o'clock. We're not far from Maluna, and actually we're not far from the Canning, which is just over there, about 100 k's. And Maluna's, yeah, down there somewhere. Anyway, back in familiar territory really. Got a fire going real quick. Charcoal's on. Look at this for a camp spot. Firewood everywhere. Bloody had a putting a beer in the fridge, and I stabbed it on the side of the freezer and it blew up, so I had to clean it out. Yeah, so I've managed to change those settings, so it's now pumping in 40 amps. The DC is up under there. I don't know if you can see that. And it was only on 30 amps, and I've changed it to 40, so it's made a massive difference. So I've only done that an hour ago, but that'll solve, you know, a lot of our problems, because yeah, running Starlink all the time now while we're driving, which is like equivalent of 2 fridges really. And I've got 2 fridges, one in the back, on that side, so that's like, yeah, you definitely notice the amount of power it draws. Anyway, he's getting some dinner ready. What's for dinner, Downey?
Beef chili paste.
Oh yeah. Fresh veggies from Broome. Nice porterhouse steak.
And rice.
And rice, eh? We'll have to get a hoodie says Downey, make it happen. What do you think? Yeah, beautiful camp spot. Pop the tent up in a minute. But first thing to do is get a fire going, get a charcoal on. Downey can do her thing. And I'll, yeah, pop the tent up, takes a minute. Right, so Downey's got rice in there, cooking over the charcoal starter. So what we've done is just chucked a few big bits of charcoal on the charcoal starter. Now the rice is pretty much cooked, but now it's going to slow cook it. So this rest of the charcoal top cook pot's ready for the stir fry. Chairs and kiwi cushions are out. It's a beer. So what's happening, Darren? That's looking good.
Prepare them.
Just coming stir fry, is it?
Yes.
And
Chili
paste. And what's in
and
there?
the sauce is mixed with oyster sauce, soy sauce, and sugar.
Palm sugar,
Yes,
oyster sauce, soy sauce, and palm sugar.
that's my basic ingredients.
And do you want a wine or something?
No.
No? You're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Beautiful night, eh? Oh, Kiwi boys and Uncle Richard would love this. Richard would have set up there. No, he would have set up over there. He would have parked his truck there. Glenn would have parked his truck there. And Brennan would have put his swag up there. I reckon that's what would have happened. So chili paste in first.
Yeah.
Nice and light. Oh, that's nice there. These little light stands are so good. Just adjustable here. Now they sort of stick into the ground, but if you can't stick them in the ground, just put a peg in the ground. Get double-sided Velcro. It works good. Yeah, so that looks pretty good, Darren. Bit of that for brekkie.
Yeah.
Some chili stir fry, rice. I've just been on the map, you know, looking at where we are. We're basically, we're right there, in there somewhere. Ned's Creek Road. Yeah, just turned off the Meekatharra Newman Road and we're on the top corner of that green. So yeah, that's where we are. Alright, gonna be a peaceful, quiet night tonight.